Howdy, and welcome to LeeReads, where I talk about the books I've been reading and enjoying lately. As soon as I hit record, the cat came over and hopped into my lap. So forewarning, if you see a tail, it's Lookout's tail. Today I have a reading wrap-up of the books that I read in April. It was a fairly solid reading month, and I was able to read a good mixture of fantasy, science fiction, and some romance. The Adventures of Amina al-Sirafi. This came in my adult fairy loot box, and it was one I was very excited to pick up because I'd heard a lot of really positive hype surrounding this novel. It is about Amina al-Sirafi, who is a retired pirate who has now been somewhat in hiding so that she can safely raise her daughter and the misdeeds of her youth don't catch up with her. But when someone comes to her to do a job for them, it's a job that she can't refuse, and so she gets pulled back into that life. I was not expecting that this novel would break the fourth wall. She is narrating the events and her history to an unseen scribe, so every now and then Amina will address the scribe. It makes you think, maybe we might have a little bit of an unreliable narrator situation. This is definitely an adventure story, although there's a lot of character information. Amina is a mature adult woman, and so she's done a lot of growing in her past. A lot of the character growth is somewhat reflective, or she's looking back on it, and the events in this story are fairly plot driven. It goes at a pretty fast pace. I felt a little bit distanced at times from the characters, a little less connected to the character than I would have preferred. She is a pirate captain, but the story is not really focused on high seas adventuring. It's more okay, the events happening at the port of call are more important than the events happening actually on the ocean, on the ship. But it was still an entertaining read from an interesting perspective. And of course, I like the idea of more books written from less commonly portrayed culture perspectives. And also, the main character is an older, mature woman who's a mother, which is not a common perspective that we see. Switching to some science fiction, I read Rubicon, an anticipated adult science fiction about a sergeant in the futuristic army who keeps getting reincarnated. Whenever she and her squad die, their consciousness basically is put into another iteration of their own body, and then they can get back to work. She starts out in this recon unit. Humanity is looking for better worlds to settle while also fighting with these artificially intelligent machines that are seemingly trying to wipe out the human race. So they are waging battles, but also scouting for habitable locations. She winds up getting transferred to a more special forces unit, and she gets a very special virtual intelligence upgrade that is more than it first appears on the surface, and through that gets pulled into some plans that a higher ranking officer has to try to end the war. This one was an interesting story intertwining aspects of virtual and artificial intelligence. It dealt a lot with trauma. The main character has a lot of trauma dealing with these repetitive deaths, having to zero out her squad. There's a lot of mental baggage that the main character is trying to work through, so this is definitely a little bit of a heavier read. It is the first book in a series, and the ending, I have opinions on the ending, but I don't want to say anything spoilery. So suffice it to say, I will be keeping my eye out for the next novel because I have some theories and I really want to see which way this series goes. Somewhat of a change, when I was in the library picking up a book I had on hold, I browsed the new releases shelf and was intrigued by the cover of A Lady's Guide to Fortune Hunting, which really feels like Pride and Prejudice meets the second season of Bridgerton. So this is a historical style romance where the main character is the oldest of 5 sisters, and she thought that she had secured a marriage that would allow her to be able to support her sister. And at the very beginning, it falls through. So suddenly, time is running out. They are running out of money, and she needs to secure herself a match in this season. She goes to London with one of her sisters and begins the maneuvering and the fortune hunting without hopefully being too obvious about it. These wealthier families know that people may be interested in them for their money, and as she starts interacting with one young son of a family house, his older brother gets quite suspicious. He sets out to learn more about this person and protect his brother and his family, and they clash from there. I really liked the twists that this novel took. The main characters were funny. You could understand both of their perspectives, and it actually really made me want to go read some Jane Austen. So that's what I did next. I listened to the audiobook of Persuasion, which I really did not know anything about. It was my second Jane Austen novel. I've read Pride and Prejudice. It is about a woman who is a middle sister and is somewhat forgotten and never really thought about. She's an afterthought for her 2 sisters and her father. Her older sister and her father are quite vain. Her younger sister's very self-centered. And then there's just Anne. She had fallen in love and was betrothed to a sailor of not high rank and not great fortune, and was persuaded not to pursue that union by a family friend, and kind of has regretted it since. And now it's 8 years later, he has entered back into the fringes of her life. Now their positions are changed, and I really liked this one. It was pretty deep. It was subtle and humorous, and it was somewhat melancholy and yet hopeful. So if you're a Jane Austen fan and you haven't read Persuasion yet, I would recommend it. There were only a couple adaptations I found, so I ended up watching the Netflix adaptation after I read it, and I liked how they portrayed some of the other characters, but I didn't really love how they portrayed Anne in that one, so I'm still looking for a good, faithful adaptation. Okay, back to fantasy. I had an advanced reading copy of Witch King by Martha Wells. This is her forthcoming new fantasy release. After the success of Murderbot, the publishers are reprinting some of her backlog fantasy works, like City of Bones, I think it's called. But this is a new release featuring a demon named Akai, who turns to consciousness to realize that someone has tried to kill him, and now they are trying to basically steal his magic. And he embarks with his closest friend and ally, who is a witch, to figure out what is going on. This novel has a lot of interesting factors to it. It's dual timeline. So in one timeline, you're following Kai and his allies in the present day as they are sorting out this mystery, trying to get into the bottom of what's happening. But then the second timeline is in the past, when some major political events happened, and it's showing Kai's involvement and how he met these people that he is working with now. And some are friends and some are foes, and it's all entangled together. Also, there are different types of magic, like different sources of power that the various people have. Kai is a demon, and that stems from the underworld, but one of his allies is a witch, which has its own kind of rules and capabilities. And there is yet another type of magic user that relies a lot more on incantations, and just how she demonstrates these different people wielding and thinking of and anticipating and kind of interfering with the magic of the others was really cool. That kind of granular level of you really felt like the magic was very much present, and I really liked that in this story. Kai themselves was fairly humorous, but not like a carbon copy of Murderbot for sure. This character is very powerful, even in these weird circumstances they find themselves in now. Has a history, and the people around him are aware and respectful of that history. And it was just a very interesting book. I really enjoyed reading it. I am not quite sure if there's going to be a continuation or not, but if you like Martha Wells, if you like fantasy with really interesting magic systems, then check out Witch King. Back to science fiction, I listened to the audiobook of Black Ops, which is the 4th Expeditionary Force novel by Craig Allinson. These are fun. I don't take them too seriously. They don't take themselves too seriously, even though they do deal with more serious things sometimes. Book 4 out of who knows how many, so it's really hard to summarize what's going on. Joe's command is expanding. Reach of humanity is getting a little bit further, and they're beginning to clash more with some of these alien species. And even though humans are so technologically inferior compared to a lot of these species, we still have, the capability to be quick-witted, decisive, and make things happen, all with the goal of trying to keep these advanced societies from really paying any attention to Earth. I'm gonna definitely continue. I sprinkle them out whenever I just need to listen to something just a little bit more pure fun. And finally, I made progress on my Exploding TBR with a novel that's also on my bingo card, The Bitter Twins by Jen Williams. It's book 2 in the Winnowing Flame trilogy. For bingo, I actually decided to put this one in the category for mythical creatures that aren't dragons, because there are dragons in this one, but there's also stuff like griffins. The world building is weird. It's almost horrific. The story follows several characters as they are trying to battle this alien species that has once again attacked their world, and the knowledge of how to defend against these alien species were lost as one of the race of peoples, the Airborns, died out. Now there is a renewed hope. There are some aspects of the technology that are beginning to come back, and they are trying to figure out how to wield them and how to best be unified against this enemy. And you're also seeing one point of view is from someone who's situated within the enemy camp. So you're learning a lot more about how the enemy thinks and what their motivations are. And I did enjoy this one. I thought that one of the plot lines felt a little bit like a MacGuffin, like go find this magical thing that's gonna help, just to kind of give those characters something to do. However, it did result in some good character development and more information about the world building. I am still eager to find out what happens in the conclusion of the trilogy. So that was Bitter Twins, and there's one more book in this trilogy to read. And those are the books that I read in April. In general, a pretty positive reading month. I made progress with some of the little challenges I have for myself. I've actually enjoyed having these sort of more loosely structured TBR lists, the bingo and then the exploding TBR, because it doesn't make me feel as restricted and stressed about reading a book in a certain amount of time that I'm self-imposing, but it still gives me some structure as far as what I might be able to pick up next. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Please subscribe if you haven't, like the video, and as always, don't forget to support your local library. Thanks. Bye.